What if I told you that some of the most powerful sultans in the Ottoman Empire, rulers of millions, conquerors of continents, also had love stories with men that history tried to bury? Behind the jeweled gates of Topkapi Palace, the empire's fate was decided not only on the battlefield, but in the private chambers where whispers of same-sex passion shaped alliances and stirred rivalries. Poets celebrated it in verses, artists hinted at it in miniature paintings, and palace insiders knew that a single glance from the Sultan could elevate a favorite to unimaginable power. Before we step inside this world of secret influence and forbidden desire, comment the time you're watching this. I love seeing when my viewers join the journey. And if you want more of the history that textbooks dared to skip, consider subscribing. No pressure, but the next revelations might change how you see the empire forever. You move past the outer gardens of the Topkapi Palace, where the scent of roses hangs heavy in the warm air, and step into a quieter corridor where the sunlight no longer reaches. The marble beneath your feet feels cool, and the air carries a faint trace of incense from some unseen brazier. These are the hidden arteries of the Sultan's household spaces, far from the noise of ceremonial courtyards, where the empire's most delicate relationships unfold away from the eyes of the crowds. The official halls may echo with decrees and proclamations, but here, in the shadowed corners, influence is measured in proximity, in trust, and sometimes in the unspoken bond between two individuals. Power, in this world, often travels along invisible lines, drawn not only by political merit, but by personal affection. The Sultan's inner circle is not made up solely of statesmen and generals. It also includes favored companions, whose value lies in presence, loyalty, and the ability to soften a moment of tension. A courtier with a quick mind, a gift for conversation, and a pleasing manner can become as indispensable as a skilled military commander. For the palace is as much a theater of personalities as it is a machine of governance. Male beauty holds a place of honor in this environment, an inheritance from both Persian and Byzantine traditions that revered physical elegance in men. In paintings and illuminated manuscripts, the beloved youth is depicted with almond-shaped eyes, fine features, and hair like dark silk. Such portrayals were not scandalous. They were celebrated as part of an artistic language that mingled admiration with devotion. In a quiet corner of the palace, a miniature painter might capture the likeness of a page in intricate gold and lapis destined for a volume kept in the Sultan's private library. A portrait meant more for remembrance than display. These young men are not mere attendants. Many are students of the Enderun, the palace school selected from among the empire's brightest and most promising. They study literature, languages, music, and diplomacy, their training shaping them into refined and capable members of the court. In their role, they learn to read the Sultan's mood with the same precision a calligrapher gives to each stroke of a pen. And in this intimacy, bonds sometimes grow deeper, acknowledged discreetly, without the need for public admission, for the culture of the court values restraint in such matters. The poetry of the palace reflects this balance between private feeling and public discretion. Ottoman poets, drawing on Persian influences, often crafted verses in which the beloved might be described as a rose-cheeked moon or a gazelle in the garden of spring. Such images are rich with metaphor, allowing sentiments to be expressed without naming their source too directly. In the candlelit rooms of the palace, these poems could be recited not just for their beauty, but for the meanings they carried for those who understood them. Hierarchy shapes every step here. A favored courtier may walk beside the Sultan in the inner gardens, sharing conversation in a low voice, while others remain at a respectful distance. That closeness might lead to privileges, appointments, estates, or the advancement of a family member rewards that are as much the fruit of trust as they are of official merit. The Ottomans understood that the people allowed to stand nearest to the ruler could shape the direction of the realm itself. The palace's very design supports this gradual narrowing of access. Visitors pass through a sequence of gates and courtyards, each one more restricted than the last, until only a select few may enter the most private chambers. By the time you arrive there, the only people present are those whose loyalty is proven beyond doubt. A foreign envoy might see this as a fortress of secrecy, but to the Ottomans, it was simply the natural order of guarding both the ruler's person and his trust. Sometimes the boundaries between service friendship and deeper attachment grow less defined. A page may rise to a senior court position, not solely for his skill in governance, but because of a bond formed in those unseen corridors. Was it favoritism? Perhaps, but in a court where alliances could mean survival, the ruler's reliance on trusted companions was as practical as it was personal. If you pause in one of these inner chambers, you might hear the low murmur of conversation behind a lattice screen. An advisor outlines the details of a provincial dispute, while a trusted companion pours the Sultan a cup of sweet sherbet. The act seems simple, but here it is layered with meaning: the unspoken assurance of loyalty, the comfort of familiar presence, and the quiet influence of one who stands close when others must remain beyond the threshold. In such moments, it becomes clear that the Ottoman Empire was shaped not only by laws and battles, but by the subtler currents of intimacy and trust flowing within the walls of its greatest palace. From those quiet chambers, you angle toward the harem gate, the corridor narrowing until your shoulders almost brush the glazed tiles, and the air grows warmer from braziers tended by silent attendants who seem to materialize only when a coal needs turning, as if the palace itself breathes through them, while you pass beneath carved inscriptions that remind you this is a protected world defined as much by thresholds as by rooms, and you feel how a single step can redraw the map of who may see whom and under what light. You learn quickly that harem is not a synonym for a crowd of concubines, but the household's guarded core, the Sultan's family and its staff, an academy, a court theater, a labyrinth of teaching rank and ceremony where the Valide Sultan presides and where discipline is the craft of turning raw talent into polished influence, while eunuchs keep the doorways honest, keys clicking at their belts, like small bells that regulate the pulse of the place, and you realize this is administration wrapped in silk rather than a rumor wrapped in fantasy. The chief black eunuch, the Kuzlar Aasi, moves like a rule. Given human shape, his authority drawn from proximity to the Valide and the Sultan's private apartments, his messages traveling through passages. Ordinary officials never tread his word, the hinge on which visits, lessons, and audiences swing as he arranges who may enter the Golden Road, that narrow corridor bright with tiles and dim with discretion, because bodies do not simply walk here, reputations do. And you feel the gravity of each footstep long after it fades. You notice how learning folds into ritual young women, taught letters, embroidery, music, and etiquette under senior tutors, while a parallel school functions on the men's side of the inner palace. The Enderun, where pages ich olanlar are trained in languages, calligraphy, and statecraft. And though the Harem and Enderun remain separate corridors and errands make their borders semi-permeable under watchful eyes, so messages, glances, and poems can travel farther than footsteps. while the design insists that nothing moves without being noticed by someone whose job is noticing. Eunuchs are everywhere, not as decoration, but as structure. Black eunuchs guarding the women's precincts, and white eunuchs governing the men's inner service. And between these two posts, the empire's most private machinery turns, because intimacy here is a matter of architecture first and intention second, and you register how carefully the Ottomans build behavior into stone, so temptations become paths with chaperones rather than secrets with locked doors. You hear music from a distant chamber and follow it to a court entertainment where the troupe has arrived to scatter precision into rhythm, and with them come the famed kochek, young male dancers, costumed in bright fabrics that flash like angled light on water bells at ankles, hair arranged with ornamental scarves, their movements quick and liquid hands, drawing arcs that blur masculine and feminine, while the audience praises timing, grace, and wry expressions that tell jokes without words, and you understand why observers across centuries struggle to describe them without explaining them away. A 17th century traveler leaves a note about such performances, careful, amused, and a little alarmed at his own interest. But the court seems unbothered, because here art is a shield and a mirror, offering the safe grammar through which desire may be looked at as choreography rather than confession. And while you watch the swirling figures and hear the clack of finger cymbals, you wonder if a culture builds an art that can carry feeling without naming it. Does the feeling become less, or does it simply learn to bow when summoned? On a cushion at the edge of the room, a poet composes in a small notebook lines of a ghazal that praises a moon-cheeked youth and a rose-petaled smile, images familiar to the palace, ear the beloved unnamed, the gender unstated, the metaphors sufficient to map the heart for anyone who knows how to read gardens and nightingales. And someone nearby murmurs the verse back to test its cadence under the drumbeat, while an attendant passes sherbet that smells faintly of quince, and you can taste how sweetness measured carefully can anchor a room that might drift. You pass a doorway and catch the tail of a conversation between a senior concubine and a black eunuch about a lesson schedule, not a scandal, but logistics. Yet the timetable contains its own kind of intimacy, because it decides who will share a courtyard with whom and at what hour. And here timing is a moral argument made with sand and sun rather than decrees. For the system arranges both the opportunity and the witness, while insisting that reputation is a garment you put on before you leave your room and keep unwrinkled even when the hallway is crowded. Pages from the Enderun arrive with messages for the Valid Sultan steward boys with immaculate posture who carry themselves like new calligraphy, still drying but already legible. Each one balancing deference with a spark that hints at future office. And you see how wit, charm, and bearing become qualifications no less than penmanship or arithmetic, because this court prizes the art of easing a ruler's day as much as solving a ledger, and where a smile placed at the correct instant can move a decision the way a fingertip moves a bead on an abacus, without anyone claiming they saw a hand. It is whispered, not shouted, that affection finds its roots in close quarters, and that roots are supervised rather than abolished. So stories travel of a page favored for his poems, of a dancer recalled privately, of a gift exchanged under the pretext of a lesson. And the harem's regulators respond not with public theater, but with rearranged schedules, shifted patrols, and an extra set of eyes at a staircase, because the empire's private law prefers prevention to spectacle, and the goal is always to keep the household's face untroubled in daylight. even when night offers more complicated arithmetic. You pause by a lattice and look into a small garden where tutors walk pupils around a fountain, hear the splash of water over marble and the soft slap of slippers on wet stone, and you consider how a place designed to protect women also teaches the court to speak about longing with elaborate courtesy, while the men who guard it and the boys trained nearby become part of this vocabulary. Their roles defined, their movements counted, yet their presence adding precisely the kind of tension that keeps poems lively and officials attentive. And you ask yourself quietly, if you lived behind these screens, what would you say aloud, and what would you fold into metaphor until it felt like prayer? You drift from the inner screens into the city's breath, where street lanterns blur on polished cobbles, and the smell of roasting beans climbs the alleys like an invitation. And by the time you reach the quarter near the bazaar, a boy has already set a tiny cup before you, black and glossy. The room you enter is a kavahane, a coffee house with benches along the walls and braziers glowing like suns. Walls hung with calligraphy and the owner's prized loot. And you notice how quickly the space teaches its customs. Slippers slide. Voices lower cards, whisper across a back table, and news travels faster than steam. Because men come here to be seen hearing things without being seen saying them. People will tell you, Istanbul's first coffee houses opened in the mid-16th century, credited to two Syrians, Hakem of Aleppo and Shams of Damascus, who set their kettles in Topkapi, pouring a dark drink learned along the Yemen-Hejaz routes. And ever since then, the city pretends to quit coffee every few years when an order arrives to close the shops, only to find new kettles singing the next morning in a different doorway. You learn quickly that this is not merely a place to drink, but a stage for verse, because poetry is the Ottoman habit of thinking aloud, and the coffee house is its rehearsal room. So a clerk from the customs house clears his throat and recites a couplet by Baki about a rose-cheeked beloved and a moonlit night. And no one asks the beloved's name or gender, because the grammar of longing here prefers images over labels and lets the audience decide what blooms behind the metaphor. A meta. One of the city's storytellers takes the floor with a cane and a handkerchief, changing voices as easily as hats becoming a jealous merchant, a sly servant, a clever widow. And then with a raised eyebrow, a preening youth admired by half the market, and you catch the laughter that follows the last roll, because the room recognizes the type without needing anyone to draw a line under the joke. From the courtyard comes the patter of finger cymbals, and for a moment, a pair of kochek pass the doorway on their way to a patron's private celebration. Hymns flicking steps, bright with practiced insolence, and the coffee house leans toward the threshold as if a scent just crossed it, because grace is a magnet here, and the city keeps a separate ledger for charm that does not consult the tax office. At another table, an ashik tunes his saz and threads a fresh couplet onto an old melody, the words circling a sweet-faced cypress whose walk is light as dawn. And someone tests whether the cypress is a boy in a porter's cap or a girl behind a lattice, and the singer smiles because the song is designed to hold both, teaching the room how to place a feeling first and an identity only if necessary. You notice small codes blooming like embroidery at the cuff. A glance held one heartbeat longer than courtesy allows a compliment that chooses the eyes instead of the handwriting. A new caller nodded just so, and you catch yourself asking if you needed to confess an affection to the only person who must hear it, and to no one else. What object would you choose as your messenger? A sprig of basil slipped into a cup, a hyacinth drawn on the inside of a notebook, a line of ink arranged to rhyme with a private name. Janissaries drift in toward evening boots, scuffed from drill coin purses tapping their hips, and the owner meets them halfway. And in the back corner, they speak from the side of the mouth about barracks, errands, and promotions. While keeping one ear on the loot, their presence a reminder that discipline and pleasure drink from the same kettle in this city. Every few rulers, an order stamps down close, the coffee houses sweep out the hookahs, send the benches to storage because governors fear that a room full of ears can grow a tongue. And you hear the name of Murad IV spoken softly, the Sultan who forbade coffee and tobacco and prowled the streets by night. But the habit of gathering is stronger than the ink of any decree, and before long cups return passed through side doors, served on boats poured behind shutters that open just wide enough for a wrist. You keep your voice low when you ask about reputation, and someone shrugs, saying a name is a parasol. It keeps you shaded if you hold it steady, and it turns inside out in a high wind. So regulars mind the rhythm of their visits, sit where they always sit, pay before the kettle boils over, and let compliments travel the long route through poetry, rather than the short street of proclamation late, when the brazier's coals go to velvet, and the last ash twists like a ghost over the tray. The talk thins into murmurs about tomorrow's market prices and a fair in Üsküdar, and whether the Metaspoon was old or only pretending to be old. And as you step outside, a night wind from the Golden Horn lifts the street lamps and sets them shivering on the water, your sleeve bright with the scent of coffee that clings like a bookmark you forget to remove. The last tremor of the coffeehouse loot trails you into Galata's dawn, and the coded glances you learned over tiny cups do not vanish at the barracks gate. They tighten their belts and march beside you, ready for the plain truth. Homosexuality lives here too. So how does the Janissary Corps discipline desire between men without tearing itself apart? You cross into the yard where the morning drum beats a steady command, and the okak, the hearth of the Corps, glows at the center like a kept vow. New faces arrive from Levy Roads and the Asimi Olanlar schools. Strangers turn brothers by drill prayer and bread from the same oven. You feel how the Corps names itself a family before it admits to being an army, and families have affections that rules can delay but not erase. Inside, the Odalar long rooms line up beds as neatly as script on a page. You stand as a chirak under an usta, who reads you the way. A scribe reads ink, catching the loosened strap, before an officer does slipping a cloak over a sleeping shoulder when the coals die down. This is where love between men finds its first shape, not in grand speeches, but in constant ordinary care, the sort that moves before anyone has to ask. You sense the line the Corps draws service, first sentiment, quiet scandal, never. And yet, you also see how closeness ignores lines that are drawn too near to breathing. At midday, the kazan arrives, copper, bright enough to hold a wavering circle of faces. One pot for one, orta, one ladle for all. Around it, the silence of eating together is a kind of oath. Everyone knows the law of the yard. Overturning that pot, kazan kaldermak, means mutiny. The loudest word a company can speak without sound. Everyone also knows another quieter law. Careless talk can injure a reputation faster than any blade, so tenderness, when it exists, wears discipline like armor. By regulation, early janissaries do not marry. The rule keeps bodies in the barracks and minds on the hearth. Years pass, framed by the same shoulders and the same breaths at night. In that narrow country, Devotion often grows sometimes as fierce camaraderie, sometimes as a romance with no need for a trumpet. The core does not bless it, but it does not pretend not to see the way two names drift toward each other on duty rosters, or the way a hand returns from the market holding a belt meant for another waist. When jealousy prowls, officers rearrange watches, move bunks, or shift errands. They prefer prevention to spectacle. Evenings soften into Mohabbat talk, Tiasaz humming low, while a veteran recalls a winter march through Thrace. Handkerchiefs appear like shy messengers, linen with a stitched cypress initials, hidden in roots and branches. A gift like that can pass for courtesy, and often it is. Sometimes it is more. You might ask yourself, if a feeling survives on quiet, does it weaken or become strong enough to ignore witnesses? Chroniclers notice what they can. Evliya Çelebi wanders the yards in his great book and records swagger, discipline, and affections packed close together. European envoys send reports that praise the order and hint at attachments they do not know how to name. They sometimes repeat barracks jokes about pretty lads hired to sing or dance, and they puzzle over the site without understanding the code. Art provides a safe grammar. The heart learns to speak through it. Rules do exist on paper sharper than any song. Military justice punishes disorder and morality offenses, and in court registers, the word levada appears often enough to prove that judges know what to call certain acts. Yet the records also show a habit of managing rather than parading shame. A case dismissed for lack of scandal. A reprimand for improper behavior with no names printed. In this world, the difference between sin rumor and politics matters more than a strict definition, and discretion is a craft everyone practices. Campaigns teach the cost of attachment and its reward. Snow eats the road. Hunger hollows the ranks. A river tries to keep what it takes. You lift your comrade because his breath is tied to yours by more than orders. Is that military duty? Of course. Does the heart recognize a deeper reason? It often does. The core does not stage a debate. It watches whether the line holds under fire. The Bektashi, lodges near the yard, keep lamplight late. You bow your head at a lintel worn smooth by foreheads. Inside tea steams. A dervish speaks of Yoldash, the companion of the road whose bond is chosen. The lodge lends words the drill does not supply, giving lawful form to loyalty without asking questions that would make officers nervous. A prayer, a song, a story, the Corps borrows these to keep the peace between rule and feeling. Harsh rains prove the system's reflexes. You remember Murad IV sending bands through the streets, chasing coffeehouse chatter into shutters. In the yard, order tightens boots, heel to heel, under bunks' muskets, at the same angle, blankets folded to a width a palm can measure. In such geometry, a glance becomes a letter and a breath, a folded note that vanishes before anyone can unfold it. If trouble nips, punishment walks quickly. The Corps would rather cut a thread than let it tangle the line. Yet the city and the barracks share one pulse. The same codes you learned over coffee eye contact held a heartbeat beyond courtesy. A compliment aimed at eyes rather than epaulets reappear at the gate. The clerk who writes the pay ledger keeps his pen impartial, but even he notices when two names fall near each other, too often to be chance. He does not comment. Paper has its own discretion. Night draws a straight line down the corridor. The watchman's staff taps in a rhythm you could follow with your eyes closed. Beneath your pillow rests a folded couplet cypress, bending toward a thin moon, written in a careful hand that refuses flourish. You breathe in lamp oil and sun-warmed wool. and let the barracks lullaby carry you. Along the row, another breath steadies. At dawn, the drum will lift both of you, and no one will ask why your steps match so well. You wake with the couplet still warm under your pillow, the cypress leaning toward the moon, and carry it into morning like a quiet instruction. The letters, a path that leads you past the arsenal walls to a courtyard where a calligrapher's window opens and the pen begins its slow river. The line on the page looks like a strand of hair across a cheek. The dot beside it looks like a beauty mark. And you realize the city has been teaching you a discipline the drill yard never named how to say everything without naming it. Divan poetry is the empire's high tongue, braided from Persian meters and Arabic scholarship, a language where desire wears metaphor like ceremonial silk. The beloved, the mashuk, rarely receives a fixed gender. To pin a label would thin the poem's power to mean more than one thing at once. So you learn the classic mazmun, the storehouse of images, cheeks as roses, lips like pomegranate seeds, lashes that cast prisons of shade, hair falling in zuluf dark curls that snare the moth of a heart, a single beauty mark hall, promoted to a sovereign that rules the face as if a dot of ink could govern an empire. None of this is coyness for its own sake. It is a practiced courtesy that lets feeling move through crowded rooms without tripping over furniture. You try the vocabulary on your tongue. The nightingale bulbul spends himself on songs to a rosegule that declines to answer. The cypress stands tall with the posture of an adored youth. The moon withholds and reveals by fractions. Dawn promises noon wavers. Nothing needs a pronoun. That is the point. Ambiguity is not a hiding place, but a house with more doors, so each reader may enter by the one they need. Names do surface, and you follow them like stepping stones across a stream. You hear Baki, 16th century sultan of poets, whose ghazals polish longing until it shines with palace light. You hear Fuzuli earlier and more sorrowful, a scholar of love who treats burning as a curriculum. Nefri thunders satire more than seduction, yet even his pages flash with a saki, a cupbearer whose tilt of the goblet can tilt a room. Then Nedim arrives in the tulip era, with laughter in his ink-writing gardens along the Bosphorus pavilions and flutes and evenings that forget to end. In his verses, the beloved may be a smooth-cheeked page, or a girl glimpsed behind a lattice. The pleasure lies in not deciding and letting the poem lean toward flesh or allegory, depending on who is listening. You recognize the craft you met last night. In the barracks, discipline on the surface, freedom underneath. You pause longest with Shey Ghalib, the Mevlevi master, who writes Husn u Ashk, beauty, and love an allegory that turns desire into a pilgrimage. Ashk seeks Husn. Across trials that feel like cities, the soul must cross only to learn that union was always within. Yet even on this mystical road, the curve of a tress, the sternness of a brow, the play of down along a cheek keep their human temperature. Here, earthly and divine loves are not rivals. They mirror one another, borrowing each other's light until both look brighter. Manuscript painters keep pace with the poets. In a muraka, an album of miniatures and calligraphies, you find the saki pouring wine in a pavilion while a lord watches with practiced calm. Pages with almond eyes lift trays. Dancers turn with wrists like stylized question marks. The scene can be read as ceremony, as aesthetic admiration, or as a wink that refuses to say where it lands. The picture gives you what the poem gives you, a grammar that protects feeling by refining it. In a mekmua, a miscellany copied by a clerk who loves verse as a falconer, loves the smoothness of a worn glove couplets, gather like friends returning to the same table. Margins host small arguments. Variants crowd the gutters. A single line about a downy cheek earns a tiny rose sketched beside it, and no inspector can object to a flower. You see how poems travel, traded for favors, sent across the Bosphorus in folded leaves copied into exercise books by boys who pretend they only want the meter. Occasionally, the record flares with scolding. A moralist writes against songs, too frank dancers, too pretty a cup, too often refilled. An imam warns that metaphors are doors left ajar. The protests prove the poems are working, reaching where prohibitions cannot patrol. In the coffee house, the meta switches voices and briefly becomes a love-struck youth. Laughter rounds the room. No complaint reaches a judge. Art holds the heat and turns it into lamplight. You test yourself with a small confession, dressed as a riddle. Which messenger would you choose if only one person must truly read it? A hyacinth pressed into a book, a line about the moon, jealous of a candle, or a couplet that claims your brow is an archer's bow, and my heart its willing target. Old conceits, yes, but they land when shot well, and no clerk can indict a metaphor without admitting he understood it first. Critics will keep asking whether these poems are really about men, about women, or about God. You learn to answer with the poet's shrug and the scribe's smile. The poem is about love. The beloved takes the shape the reader brings to the page. Within Ottoman letters, such generosity is not evasion. It is a deliberate hospitality that lets secret and sanctity walk the same road without quarreling. By noon, the calligrapher lays down his pen, and the ink dries to a dark sheen. You fold last night's couplet cypress and moon back into your sleeve and step into a breeze from the golden horn that lifts the leaves of unseen books. Somewhere, a lute begins a fresh prelude, and you hear the city reciting its quiet lesson: speak less and speak so well that you mean more. You carry the day's first breeze from the golden horn into a Galata bookshop, where bindings breathe the dust of two languages at once, and the owner sets a trunk on the counter with a grin that means rumor and profit have just shaken hands. Outslide travel journals stitched in rough thread letters copied by patient clerks, and a handful of engravings that smell faintly of lampblack and seawater. You turn a page and meet your first foreign pair of eyes, eager scandal ready, and already certain they understand what they have not yet learned how to name. Ogier Ghiselin de Bousbec looks up at you from the 16th century with tulip bulbs in his pocket and surprise in his ink. He praises the order of the court and the sharpness of the stables, then stumbles when the palace's aesthetics ask him to admire beardless youths, pages as polished as jade, and dancers whose steps glide between masculine and feminine with a grace borrowed from Mercury. He writes what he can, guesses what he can't, and lets the rest hang in the air like smoke, and you feel how a sentence can tighten when the hand that writes it thinks holiness must always wear a single face. Jean-Baptiste Tavernier arrives a century later with a jeweler's eye and a trader's appetite. He has stories in his satchel, some purchased, some earned, some merely overheard through a screen. He copies the city's glints and rumors together until the page looks like the Bosphorus at noon. Everything flashing, not all of it water. Where the Kochek turn, he turns his pen. Where the barracks laugh at a joke, he writes down the laughter and forgets the context, because the room that made the joke is not interested in explaining it to a visitor who pays in astonishment. Joseph Pitton de Tournefort walks in with a botanist's net and a moralist's weather report. He admires gardens, lists herbs, and then scolds people he has just met for pleasures he has barely seen. He can catalog a hyacinth with perfect clarity and misread a glance 2 feet from his nose. When he finds verse about a moon-cheeked beloved, he drags the line to court in his head, translating Masman into accusation as if poetry were a signed confession rather than a room designed for more than one meaning. Antoine Galland listens more than he claims to understand. He moves through salons and embassies, hears the lute at dusk, and collects stories that will make his name elsewhere. In his notebooks, the city's male dancers flicker pages, carry trays with downcast lashes, and a saki tilts a cup in a way that makes an evening tilt with it. Galland's ink keeps its manners, yet even his careful phrases show the tug-of-war between intrigue and propriety that European pens perform whenever Ottoman art refuses to separate beauty from ambiguity. Then Lady Mary Wortley Montague, sharp amused and unafraid, pulls a chair to your table. Her letters refuse the easy scandal, especially where women are concerned. She calls European fantasies to heal describes baths without the tremor of a sermon, and when she meets a custom she dislikes, she sentences it without dismissing the people who live inside it. She will not solve your puzzles about men. She does tell you that looking harder does not mean seeing more if your eyes have already been told what is moral before they have learned what is true. Translations make their own weather. A page calls someone Mahbub beloved, and a foreign clerk renders it with a word that belongs to another century's courtroom, and the poem hardens into evidence it was never meant to be. Kochek becomes a slur in a margin. Delikanlı, the quick-blooded youth, is filed under a species of vice. You watch meaning stumble at the frontier of dictionaries, then stand up wearing a soldier's coat that does not fit and a reputation it did not ask for. Engravers in Amsterdam and Paris sharpen the city into copper-plate hammams with steam drawn like silk veils, gardens hung with lanterns, a pavilion where a cupbearer's wrist turns just so, and by the time the prince reached northern mantles, the pavilions have learned to whisper louder than they ever did here. A husband points with a smirk. A guest nods as if a distance of 1,000 miles has given him expertise, and the original scene, which allowed multiple readings, is fixed into one like a song forced into a single key by an impatient choir. You keep reading, and the pattern repeats. A traveler admires the Janissary's discipline in one paragraph, then clucks at unnatural tastes in the next, not noticing that his own account has just described the very closeness he condemns as the source of the Corps' unbreakable line. Another visitor marvels at poetry contests in the coffee house and then translates every rose and nightingale into a confession, forgetting that the empire's most serious jurists do not translate with such speed. A third copies a joke about a pretty lad and loses the wink that kept the line from injury, because the wink lives in the room and refuses to be folded into exported paper. Gentle sarcasm comes easily in a bookshop, but the city earns something better than easy mockery. Most of these writers are working at the edge of their own vocabularies. They have been trained to think desire has only 2 doorways and arrive in a place that builds houses with many rooms. They peer into one and insist the whole building must be that chamber. You grant them witnesses' rights. You do not grant them final judgment. Every so often, you find a page that almost gets it. A note that admits ambiguity is not a trick, but a courtesy. A line that concedes the difference between what a judge must forbid, what a poet may praise, and what a household will tolerate if reputation holds. That is as close as you will get to a foreign sentence standing on Istanbul's exact ground without wobbling. The shop grows warm. The owner props open the door with a stack of pamphlets. The harbor wind taps the bells of Galata's masts. You close a journal and feel the city's older language tug at your sleeve. Again, reputation, discretion, architecture schedule the careful distance between a glance and a scandal. Your fingers stray to a thin codex on the counter. Its cover plain, its pages edged with the neatness of scribes who copy rulings for people who cannot afford to misunderstand them. And the sound the book makes when you lift it is the sound of a threshold shifting underfoot. The codex in your hands smells faintly of ink leather, and the kind of caution that grows in a world where love between men can flourish in a poem, yet be punished in a courtroom. In the Ottoman Empire, homosexuality could be celebrated in verse on Tuesday and prosecuted in court on Wednesday. How did anyone live between those two truths without being crushed? You open to a page where the scribe's reed pen has shaped each line like a row of soldiers. Margins ruled with the care of someone who knows the cost of a missing word. This is not poetry. It is law, kanun, the Sultan's edicts standing beside Shariat Islamic jurisprudence. Together, they draw the lines, and sometimes those lines meet. And sometimes they leave gaps wide enough for a life to slip through. In the Hanafi school of law, dominant in the empire, sexual acts between men, liwat, are prohibited, carrying potential penalties from flogging to death, depending on circumstance proof and the mood of the judge. Yet the practical record is more varied than the strict theory. Punishment often depends on status, discretion, and whether a scandal has already made the gossip rounds. A court in Aleppo might hand down lashes. A court in Istanbul might dismiss for lack of evidence if the accused is an influential sipahi. The law says one thing, but the judge listens for another, the volume of the rumor. The registers show patterns. Many cases collapse into fines or banishment. The most severe penalties are rare, reserved for moments when politics demands severity. The empire's pragmatism shows here a corps cannot function if half its men are in chains. A court cannot sit if every poet is hauled before it. A market cannot run if every coffee house is emptied of its musicians. Instead, enforcement often becomes a matter of managing public image. As long as an affair remains private and no insult to a family's honor spills into the street, the machinery of punishment may not turn at all. You trace your finger to a ruling that names not only the act, but the location, a hammam in Bursa, where the accused were caught in an indecent state. The penalty: expulsion from the guild and a fine. No jail, no lash. The point was to make the case visible enough to warn others, but not to ruin men who might still be useful in their trades. Another page notes indecent songs sung at a wedding. The singer is fined, the family warned, and the record closes without further action. Imperial decrees occasionally thunder against corruption of youth, especially in port cities where foreign sailors, kochek dancers, and seasonal workers mix. The sultans most concerned with moral order, Murad IV, again, or later Mahmud II, frame such acts as threats to military readiness and social stability, not merely personal sin. But even these moments of strictness have their limits. They tend to fade when the court's attention turns to war, succession, or revenue. The duality seeps into language. Words like muhabbat, affection, sadakat, loyalty, and dost friend can be stretched to cover deep attachment without inviting legal danger. Even in testimonies, people choose words that hint without indicting they were together after dark, instead of naming the act. This careful vocabulary becomes a shield, one that allows relationships to exist in the open, as long as no one uses the wrong noun at the wrong time. In the Madrises, jurists debate whether certain poetry crosses into forbidden territory. Some argue that verse about moon-faced youths is harmless as long as it remains metaphor. Others see danger in every simile that draws blood to the cheeks. A legal opinion from Damascus notes that a man's guilt cannot be assumed from the softness of his words or the beauty of his companions. There must be proof. That proof in Ottoman courts is rarely found without confession or multiple credible witnesses. You think of the coffee houses and the janissary yard spaces, where bonds between men are visible but coded, affectionate but disciplined. The law seems designed to keep such worlds in a state of tension, always close to the edge, but rarely forced into the fall. It is less a sword poised over the neck than a shadow that lengthens or shortens, depending on the season, the politics, and the temperament of the judge. Yet there are moments when the shadow falls hard. A case in the 17th century names a palace page and a high-ranking official. The charge is clear, the witnesses many, the scandal impossible to ignore. The page is dismissed, the official exiled to a provincial post. The punishment is as much about saving the court's dignity as enforcing moral law. In another record from Crete, 2 men are executed for repeat offenses after multiple prior warnings. The scribes note the act without flourish, as if marking a debt repaid. This selective severity shapes behavior. Men who live in these margins learn to master discretion, to cultivate plausible deniability, to use the accepted codes of poetry, music, and patronage as both expression and camouflage. The law is a map. They learn where the ink is thin. As you close the codex, you realize that survival here depends on reading 2 texts at once, the official one where rules are unyielding, and the unofficial one where human relationships negotiate with those rules every day. Between them is the space where lives unfold, not always safely, but often enough to leave a record in verse and rumor, and in the careful way people look at each other across a crowded room. You close the codex and find you are still reading, only now the text is written on roads, ferries, and mountain paths, a script of customs and hints that continues where statutes stop. You test what you've learned in the capital against places where the empire loosens its belt by a notch, and the first line you follow is a salt-sweet one out across the water, to a port that calls itself Izmir in one ear and Smyrna in the other. The docks speak in tiers of cargo and languages. Greek boatmen sing rough couplets. Armenian factors argue decimal softly. A Jewish broker switches from Turkish to Ladino and back again without spilling a figure. Ottoman soldiers lean on muskets and watch the tide pretend to set schedules. When evening lowers its shoulders, the coffee houses along the quay fill with sailors who swear they will leave at dawn and storytellers who never do. A troop of kochak sweeps in with bells at the ankles, and an old tailor claps along not because he is careless, but because the steps remind him of a youth. He once trained a boy who could cut a sleeve so true the cloth obeyed him like water. You recognize the code you learned in Istanbul, admiration that lands where it lands, protected by the grammar of art. The Qada's court here knows how to count scandal. A fisherman and a porter are fined for improper conduct in a bathhouse, the kind of formula that tightens the room without listing the furniture. They keep their livelihoods. The guild master offers a warning that sounds like a proverb. The record closes. In another line, A bride's family complains of a singer whose songs at the wedding were too vivid, and the penalty is a small coin and a promise to repeat nothing but lullabies for a month. You see how law travels with a provincial accent, precise when it must be patient, when it can be attentive to reputations as much as to rules. North, and a turn brings you to Salonic Thessaloniki, where minarets and church towers count the same hours with different wrists. In the market, a Jewish apprentice hums a romance he learned from his uncle, a song that praises a smooth-cheeked light and keeps the verb carefully unspecific. A Greek barber raises an eyebrow as if to ask whose face that light belongs to today, and the boy smiles with the serenity of someone who has read enough poems to know that answers can waste a good line. At the bath, steam blurs the boundary between gossip and mist. A guild elder raps a cane once on the tile to remind everyone that friendship is a blessing and foolishness a bill, and the slosh of water returns to its regular paragraph. Caravans pull you east to Aleppo, whose khans close around their courtyards like stout books. Here the pages are merchants, and the ink is cardamom leather and sweat. At dusk, men settle on mats beneath wooden galleries, while an ashik tunes his saz and threads an old melody with a new couplet about a cupbearer whose hand pours more than drink. The muhtasib, the market inspector, passes under the arches. A brazier brightens in respect, and the song does not need to edit itself, because metaphor is already doing the work. A judge's clerk copies the week's cases. By lantern, a brawl over a debt, a complaint about a perfumer who diluted his musk, a caution about indecent behavior, dismissed for lack of witnesses. You watch discretion do its quiet arithmetic again, a balance sheet that counts both sin and utility, both rumor and bread. South, and the air warms toward Damascus, where lanes run like cool threads between gardens. In a Mevlevi lodge, a dervish spins until the floor seems to rise to meet him a lesson in how a body can become its own circle. After the ceremony, tea and talk turn to loyalty, dostluk, and a retired janissary. Now a watchman describes a comrade from years back in the language of endurance, rather than desire. You hear what the words make room for and what they politely step around. The lodge does not police his phrasing. It leaves him the width he needs to stay whole. Back to the Aegean interior, the hills carry you into towns where Zebek, rough-booted fighters with pistols at their waistcloths and pride like a knife dance in a semicircle at weddings, chests, lifted hands out steps, measured as if the earth itself were a drum. Their code is older than the phrasing of edicts stand for your companion. Keep your word, protect the guest. In their talk, you catch the same protective discretion you met behind the Topkapi screens, just dressed in leather and dust. If affection travels here, it travels armed with honor and arrives home before dawn. On islands, the Venetian past lingers in balconies and loanwords. In Candia, the scribes write in Turkish but swear under their breath in Greek. The Kada weighs a case involving a musician and a wine shop, and the punishment is a shuttered door for 7 days, all theater designed to keep the neighborhood's peace. Across the straight-on roads, a garrison keeps time by canon and by rumor. A couplet about a cypress, and a moon surfaces again, copied on cheap paper and tucked into a soldier's sash. You smile at the way a small poem can find employment in every province, doing steady work for feelings that refuse to sit idle. You begin to trust the empire's unwritten indexes, hammams that get quieter when the wrong guest enters, coffee houses that adjust their music when someone's uncle is in town. guilds that move an apprentice to another bench when a master grows careless with boundaries. Not virtue in marble, no, but moderation in wood and rope, flexible knottable, quick to retie when a storm passes. Do you trust a decree more than a doorway whisper? Or do you learn, as most do, to listen to both and let your feet decide which one you will obey? Tonight, Evliya Çelebi's voice catches up with you in a roadside khan near Bursa, cheerful as ever, recording a troupe of dancers, a preacher's scold, and a judge's shrug in the same paragraph. He laughs at excess praises hospitality and moves on before anyone can draft him into a moral argument he did not start. His pages confirm what your steps have been spelling. The farther you walk from the capital, the more the empire governs by the geometry of rooms and relationships. A frown can be a sentence, a schedule change a verdict, a moved doorway an absolution. By the time you turn back toward the Bosphorus, you carry a pocket full of provincial footnotes, fines rather than floggings, warnings rather than trials, songs that keep their pronouns unpinned, and glances that carry news faster than couriers. You return with the sense that the law you read yesterday and the life you walk today are not enemies so much as partners who refuse a public quarrel, each allowing the other to save face. The wind off the water smells of tar and figs. A boatman calls. Somewhere in the city, a clerk sharpens his pen for new reforms, and the ferryman who has seen fashions change more often than currents grins without promising what tomorrow's page will say. You dock in the capital again, and the city greets you with the smell of wet stone and the clink of scaffolding poles. Somewhere between your last crossing and now, the empire has changed its clothes. Reforms are in the air, and the Sultan's gaze has turned inward with a restlessness that rarely leaves custom untouched. The 18th century has ripened into the 19th, and the Tanzimat winds begin to whistle through the streets like a draftsman's straight edge across a table. The word Tanzimat reorganization sounds polite enough, but you've learned to listen for the work it hides. Civil codes are rewritten, military corps, restructured ministries, reshuffled. Where once reputation could be mended with a closed door and a quiet month, the new laws print expectations in a typeface big enough for foreign embassies to read. French advisors and translated penal codes arrive in the same trunks. They unpack not only legal phrases, but entire categories of offense that previous judges had preferred to treat with discretion. The vocabulary of public morality grows teeth sharper than the old proverbs. The Janissaries, with their own complicated history of affection and discipline, are long gone abolished in the auspicious incident of 1826. The new army drills in European uniforms, rows of buttons, replacing the soft folds of caftans, and with the uniforms come imported regulations. In these pages, prohibitions that were once elastic in practice become stiff. It is one thing for a Qadi in Bursa to fine a man for indecency and leave the rest to his guild. It is another for a military tribunal, modeled on Prussian lines, to enforce written articles without room for proverb or wink. You leaf through the fresh law books and find the influence of the Napoleonic Code in the way certain acts are defined explicitly without the old poetic cover. The Tanzimat codifiers pride themselves on clarity, but clarity has consequences. The more sharply an offense is drawn, the less room there is for judges to interpret. Where once ambiguity protected precision, now accuses. The change is not immediate. Everywhere provincial courts still practice the old discretion, but in the capital, the shift is visible, like the straightening of streets in a new neighborhood plan. Diplomatic pressure plays its part. European powers present themselves as moral tutors, even as their own port cities carry reputations not unlike Galata's. In negotiations, they fold morality into trade and legal reform, pushing the empire to align its codes with theirs. Some Ottoman officials, eager to project a civilized image to foreign eyes, embrace the stricter stance. Others grumble that these imported scruples misunderstand the balance the empire has maintained for centuries between law, art, and life. You notice the cultural ripples. Coffee houses that once hosted poetry contests now advertise their compliance with new regulations, playing music, quieter, hiring fewer dancers, and arranging their chairs so that conversations look more like business than leisure. Certain Mazmun, the rose cheek and the downy lip, begin to drop out of printed verse, surviving mostly in private manuscripts and the recitation of older men who no longer seek patrons. The Kochek tradition wanes under both official disapproval and the changing tastes of audiences. Its costumes and steps survive in folk memory, but the urban stage narrows. In some neighborhoods, surveillance takes the form of architecture. New police posts at major crossroads, better lit streets, the removal of secluded garden walls in favor of open sightlines. The city that once offered countless alcoves for a private word or an exchanged glance becomes in certain districts an arrangement of straight streets and watched corners. Privacy has to be sought more carefully in smaller courtyards and rooms above shops where the shutters stay angled. And yet, as you've seen before, the empire's social fabric does not unravel on command. Affection adapts. In literature, the beloved reappears under safer guises: an idealized friend, a childhood companion, a fellow student in exile. Theater companies smuggle the old Mazmun into historical plays, setting their longing in bygone eras so that censors can be persuaded it's just history. In music, certain songs are introduced with a knowing nod that lets the audience decide which lyrics they will hear plainly and which they will drape in their own understanding. Court records from the mid-19th century still reveal leniency in many cases, especially outside the capital. A Cadi in Konya dismisses a charge for immoral conduct when the accuser cannot produce witnesses. In Trabzon, a fine is levied, but the men involved are permitted to return to their work. The new laws exist, but old habits of balancing public peace against private behavior persist, especially where foreign scrutiny is less intense. By the 1870s, printed newspapers sometimes comment on moral reform, quoting government circulars about the need for public decency. These articles tend to echo European moral vocabulary, but local readers respond with letters that defend poetry, music, and hospitality as integral to Ottoman life. You recognize the argument that beauty and connection are not imported vices, but native strengths, and that they can coexist with order if the law allows. As the century closes, the empire stands with one foot in its long tradition of discretion, and the other in the modernizing impulse to regulate. The tension remains how to present a moral face to the watching world without erasing the private arrangements and artistic languages that have carried people through centuries. You step out of the law office into the cool air of a side street, hearing a faint melody from an upstairs window, a tune older than any penal code drifting down between the shutters, as if to prove that some measures cannot be legislated away. The upstairs melody follows you into the lane, and even as reforms light the streets and officials tidy the stages, the oldest fact refuses to dim: homosexuality survives here. How do men keep it breathing under brighter lamps and stricter pages? You carry that question down to the quay, where the water writes and erases the city's name with every slap against the stones. The tune threads the air like a reminder that laws can straighten roads but not hearts. And you feel how the same codes you learned across these nights still work quietly. A glance held one heartbeat longer than courtesy, a compliment that chooses the eyes instead of the epaulet, a folded square of linen with a cypress stitched so small it must lean close to be read. You think of the Kahavahani of verses that speak in roses and nightingales, and understand why metaphors outlive decrees. They carry truth without tripping censors, and they give breath to people who prefer living to arguing. On a fairy bench, you sort the voices that have walked beside you. The poets arrive first, not with trumpets, but with patient keys. Baki's, Polish, Nedim's laughter, along the Bosphorus, Shey Ghalib's pilgrimage, where desire learns its own map. They never asked you to choose a single door. They built a house with many rooms and left them all cracked open. The barracks follows Boots quiet, reminding you how discipline can hold affection without naming it, how a hand that tightens a strap may mean more than any oath sworn aloud. The courts murmur next, their registers stacked like careful masonry cases, dismissed for lack of witnesses, fines imposed where spectacle would only tear reputations, the old dance between order and mercy that kept the city's face calm, even when stories ran warm underneath. From the roads, you hear the provinces answer Smyrna's key with its mixed tongues, Thessaloniki's barbershop hum, Aleppo's Khan, where an Ashik threads a new couplet into an old melody, and the Muhtasi pretends not to hear what needs no hearing. Each place tuned the same scale a little differently, proof that the empire governed not only with codes, but with room schedules and the exact length of a frown. You learn to read doorways the way a jurist reads margins, who may pass when and under which light. Then the century turns its page with a hard crease. The janissaries are gone. The Tanzimat pen writes sharply. Foreign eyes press for clarity that forgets why ambiguity was kind. Coffee houses trim their music Masman retreat to private manuscripts. The Kochek fade from fashionable stages. Surveillance moves into architecture, brighter lamps, straighter streets, corners that prefer to be seen. Yet even then, you notice endurance, changing its shape rather than its purpose. A song introduces its own alibi from an older time. A play sets longing in a distant era and lets audiences do the rest. A judge in a provincial town asks for witnesses, and hearing none lets a case dissolve as neatly as steam. You walk past a wall where jasmine climbs, and think of language that still carries shelter, dust for friend when the word must be broad, Yoldash, for companion when the road must be named, instead of the heart Mohabbat for affection, when it would be unwise to measure it in units. Aren't these the same soft tools you held in the palace, the barracks, the bath, the bookshop? When a culture teaches you how to speak around danger without abandoning truth, is that evasion? Or is it craft learned for survival? The melody swings you back to art. In a Mekmua, someone kept you. Find a familiar couplet moon leaning toward a cypress, copied 300 miles from the place you first saw it, its ink gone brown, its curve unchanged. In a miniature album, the cupbearer's wrist still turns just so, and the light on his sleeve still asks the old gentle question without forcing an answer. In a ledger, from a guild, two names continue to appear side by side more often than chance. The clerk records wages and says nothing because paper, like cities, prefers peace where peace can hold. You think of enforcement again and realize the secret you have been learning slowly as night settles. Even when law speaks, life often negotiates. Even when speech is watched, meaning finds detours. The empire's story of men who loved men is not a straight tale of silence or a full shout of freedom. It is the steady labor of living between texts, poetry, and statute rumor, and schedule without letting either crush the other. Doesn't every society draw this map in its own hand, whether it admits it or not? A breeze from the Golden Horn lifts the corners of a street poster and brings you a smell that has followed you since the first page: coffee and lamp oil, the twin perfumes of gathering and secrecy. You catch in the half-light a detail easy to miss: a shopkeeper angling his chair to give two customers a pocket of privacy. A watchman's staff tapping twice instead of once before he climbs the next stair. A musician pausing just long enough for a line to land without words. Small things, but then small things were always the empire's best engineers. You pass a gate you've passed before and smile at the memory of Murad IV prowling through your chapters, chasing chatter into shutters. Even his night could not outlast the stubborn habit of people to find one another. If that was true, then when cauldrons could signal mutiny and couplets could travel farther than couriers, how could it not be true now, when songs and stories still move faster than rules? The ferry bumps the dock. You step ashore with the quiet certainty that history did not erase these lives. It wrote them in a hand that prefers shade to glare, detail to declaration. If you carry anything from this walk, let it be the grammar you've learned: architecture as etiquette, discretion as kindness, metaphor as shelter. You know now why the cypress keeps leaning and the moon keeps answering, why the nightingale insists on his single subject century after century. They were never decorations. They were signals, steady and patient for anyone willing to listen closely. You climb toward your door. Somewhere a drum counts a familiar measure. Somewhere else laughter tips out of a tavern like light. You set the latch and let the melody finish its loop through the room. It leaves the way it entered on its feet, sure of its root, carrying a truth older than any code that love, even when it walks softly, still crosses a city. You fold the last couplet cypress and moon into your sleeve and lie down, and the city, pleased with your reading, dims the lamps and lets you keep the tune. While the hidden romances of Ottoman sultans reveal a side of power rarely acknowledged, they were only one thread in the intricate tapestry of palace life. For every whispered affair in the sultan's private chambers, there was another world behind locked doors: the harem. Here, hundreds of women lived under strict rules, political intrigue and constant competition for the ruler's attention. Their days were a delicate dance between luxury and captivity, ambition and survival. To truly understand the empire's heart, we must step inside those gilded walls and follow a single concubine through an ordinary yet extraordinary day. The first thing you feel isn't the light, it's the sound. A small, deliberate rustle in the dark, like silk brushing over silk, wakes you before the muezzin's call ever dares to rise over the city. The harem's pre-dawn hush is thick, broken only by the soft sigh of someone turning in her narrow bed and the faint chime of a bangle against wood. Your eyes blink open to the dim outline of latticed windows, and for a moment you forget where you are. Then you remember, you know, you are here in the Sultan's inner world, where hundreds of women rise and sleep within a single breath's reach of power. The air smells faintly of last night's rosewater and the ghost of incense that clung to the corridors long after the lamps went out. You lie there a heartbeat longer, pretending to be asleep. It's safer that way. Somewhere to your left, a rival is already awake, likely counting the seconds until she can claim the best basin in the morning wash. She shifts with the deliberate grace of someone who knows she's being watched even here. The harem is always watching. Do you ever think about how exhausting it must be to live in a place where every glance is an assessment, every pause, a calculation? This is one of those moments where breathing too loudly feels like giving something away. A thin thread of light starts to filter in through the mashrabiyah screens. Not the golden burst of daybreak, but a prelude, the sort of dim glow sailors might call the false dawn. You roll onto your side, your blanket slipping just enough for the cool air to sneak in. The cotton is coarse against your cheek, nothing like the silk you wear in the daytime, and yet it is familiar grounding. This is the part of the morning no one tells the poets about: the cold floors, the stiff joints, the unromantic shuffle of bare feet toward the day's first duty. A distant splash echoes from the baths, and you picture the older concubines already seated in the steam-trading whispers like coins. You're not there yet. There is an order to things, a rhythm learned through observation, and the occasional painful misstep. Take, for example, the story of Aishi, who last year decided to skip the morning bath to save time for extra hair braiding. She earned herself a month of chilly stares from the bath mistress, and worse, a subtle exclusion from the Valid Sultan's casual greetings. A simple miscalculation in this place can echo longer than a drumbeat at court. You swing your legs over the side of the low bed toes, curling against the chill of the tile. It's funny, people outside imagine the harem as endless, lounging on cushions. But those cushions are for later, after the work of being beautiful and ready is done. Right now, your world is about getting from the sleeping chamber to the baths without stepping on someone's elaborately arranged slippers, or worse, her pride. A quick glance around tells you half the room is still wrapped in blankets. Faces turned toward the wall, hoping to steal a few more moments of rest before the day becomes too loud to bear. From the corridor, you hear the faint thud of a wooden pestle in a mortar. The kitchen girls are awake, pounding spices for the morning bread. Cinnamon, cardamom, and a hint of clove drift in like an unspoken promise. It's not breakfast yet, but the scent threads through your chest all the same, making you wonder if the day will bring comfort or challenge. Some mornings smell like cinnamon. Others smell like vinegar and bad tempers. You learn to tell the difference quickly. You reach for your shawl, a simple cotton wrap, its edges fraying from daily use. Wrapping it around your shoulders, you take your first steps toward the door, and the soft swish of fabric joins the slow chorus of others rising. Behind you, someone clears her throat, a sharp, intentional sound. It might be aimed at you, or it might not. In the harem, you never assume anything is harmless. Stepping into the corridor is like stepping into a different climate. The air is cooler, scented faintly, with the lavender sachets that hang from brass hooks at each doorway. The walls, painted in soft earth tones, seem to absorb the dim lamplight, creating shadows that look deeper than they are. You pause just long enough to adjust the shawl, not because you need to, but because every move here is part habit, part performance. If someone happens to notice, you let them see calm composure, not a sleepy scramble. The floor beneath you is smooth marble, worn down by decades of slippered feet. You think about all the women who have walked this same path before, ambitious, frightened, proud, or resigned. Some names you know: Kosem Sultan, who began as a concubine and rose to wield power over an empire. Harem, the red-haired outsider who rewrote her fate entirely. Others have been lost to time, their lives reduced to little more than whispers and half-remembered songs. The marble doesn't care. It carries every step without judgment. You move slowly toward the faint sound of water, knowing the baths are not far. The faint metallic tang of heated copper lingers in the air, mingled with the low murmur of voices. Somewhere beyond those doors lies the first negotiation of your day, not over jewels or rank, but over basins, towels, and space on the warm stone benches. It's a strange kind of battleground fought with polite tones and careful smiles. You're nearly at the bathhouse entrance now, the carved wooden doors just ahead, their panels inlaid with mother of pearl that glints even in the weak light. The sound of running water is stronger here, a steady rush that makes you want to quicken your steps. Your hand hovers just above the brass handle, warm from the heat that seeps through the door. Inside, the day will truly begin, and whatever alliances or rivalries are born, there will follow you like perfume. The moment you push the door open, the world changes. Warmth rushes out to meet you, carrying with it the thick, damp breath of the hammam. The air here feels heavy, scented with rosewater soap made from olive oil, and something sharper, perhaps the crushed mint, leaves floating in one of the copper basins. Your skin, chilled from the marble corridors, drinks it in like a thirsty plant. The soundscape is a blend of splashes, murmured conversations, and the occasional ring of a ladle striking a basin's rim. Steam curls and clings to the domed ceiling, where small round windows, no bigger than saucers, let in pale morning light that filters down in hazy columns. You step inside, letting the door ease shut behind you, and your vision blurs for a moment as the heat fogs your eyes. The hammam is its own small kingdom territories, marked not by walls, but by who sits where, who serves whom, and who has the confidence to take the best spot near the central gobektasha, the great heated marble slab in the middle of the room. You tread carefully over the wet tiles, your bare soles making soft smacks against the stone. A girl with a thick braid coiled like a rope around her head glances up from rinsing her arms, eyes darting briefly over you before she looks away. That quick flicker is all you need to know. She's measuring you, wondering if you'll dare to claim a space closer to the warmth than she has. You don't, at least not today. Near the gobektasha, a pair of older concubines sit shoulder to shoulder, their heads bent in what looks like idle chatter. You know better. Every word here has weight, even the ones wrapped in laughter. One of them is Fatma, known for a memory as sharp as a barber's blade. She can recall exactly who said what and when and to whom. The other is Layla, her smile sweet enough to disguise the fact that she has quietly guided the downfall of at least 2 rivals in the past year. You find yourself wondering, not for the first time, how much of harem life is lived in the steam rather than in the gilded chambers. A young bath attendant passes you a copper bowl filled with warm water. The metal hums faintly against your palms from the heat. You pour it slowly over your arms, the stream running down in shivering rivulets before dripping off your fingertips. The sensation is immediate and hypnotic. It almost makes you forget that the hammam is not just a place to wash, but a marketplace of information. If the harem is a web, this is where the threads meet. A soft clatter draws your eyes to the far side of the room, where a cluster of girls gathers near a carved marble niche. Their laughter is low but frequent, punctuated by the slap of a wet cloth on skin. You catch snippets of their talk, news of a merchant ship arriving in the Golden Horn, a rumor about the Valid Sultan's latest charity project, and the inevitable speculation about which concubine the Sultan might favor next. No one says a name outright, of course. It's always a certain someone or she who was seen as if words themselves could be dangerous. It's in these half sentences that you begin to piece together the shape of the day. There's mention of a shipment of silks arriving from Bursa, meaning the palace seamstresses will be busy, and the hierarchy of who gets what fabric will be quietly contested. Someone else mentions that the chief black eunuch, the Kislar Ayasa, was seen in discussion with the Sultan's steward late last night, an unusual hour for palace business. A subtle ripple moves through the group at this. Whatever that meeting means, everyone wants to be prepared. You settle onto a low bench along the wall where the steam rises in lazy spirals. An attendant approaches with a kizzy, the rough mitt used for exfoliating, and begins to scrub your arms in firm, practiced strokes. It's not a gentle process. The mitt drags away, layers of dead skin with a grit that makes you grit your teeth. But there's a strange comfort in the ritual. You imagine all the tensions of yesterday flaking away, with it leaving you just a little lighter, a little more ready for whatever comes. A question drifts over from somewhere to your right. Have you heard? The words are casual enough, but you notice the way every head within earshot tilts slightly toward the speaker. She goes on to tell of a minor concubine new to the palace, who supposedly tried to deliver a message directly to the Valid Sultan without going through the proper channels. The reaction is immediate, a mix of pity, scorn, and the kind of interest that comes when you see someone else make a mistake you've worked so hard to avoid. You remember reading once about how Queen Mother Safiye Sultan in her day kept such tight control over who spoke to her that even high-ranking women in the harem had to wait weeks for an audience. Imagine then the audacity or naivety of bypassing all that. In the hammam, this tale will be told and retold, each version sharper than the last, until the girl's name is inseparable from her blunder. As the scrubbing ends, the attendant rinses you with another bowl of hot water, steam rising in fragrant bursts. You close your eyes for a second, letting the heat soak deep into your muscles. Somewhere in the background, the clink of copper bowls keeps time with the ebb and flow of talk. You don't join in today, you listen. In a place like this, speaking too much can be more dangerous than saying nothing at all. By the time you rise, the steam has settled into your hair and skin, carrying the scent of rosewater with you. You drape your shawl over your shoulders once more, feeling both cleaner and more tangled in the invisible politics than when you entered. Outside, the corridor will be cooler, quieter, but you know the whispers from the hammam will follow you long after the warmth has faded from your skin. The corridor beyond the hammam feels almost too sharp after all that heat, like stepping out of a greenhouse into the brisk edge of early morning. The cool air catches in your damp hair, raising goosebumps along your neck. You walk slowly, not because you're tired, but because the marble underfoot has become just a bit more treacherous, with the film of moisture clinging to your soles. Ahead, the dressing chambers hum with quiet activity, and the muted clatter of wooden combs against carved ivory mirrors drifts toward you. You pass through the arched doorway and are immediately wrapped in a new kind of warmth. Not steam this time, but the low, steady heat of braziers set along the walls. The scent here is layered beeswax from the polished furniture musk from the cedar chests, and the faint tang of iron from hairpins scattered across a dressing table. Attendants flit from one woman to another like well-trained birds, carrying trays of jewelry, folded silks, and tiny crystal bottles of perfume oil. Your own small corner of the room waits for you, marked by a narrow lacquered chest and a low stool. On top of the chest, the neatly folded garments for the day lie ready soft inner linens, a long Antari robe in deep pomegranate red, and a lighter gauzier outer layer embroidered at the cuffs with delicate gold thread. The color wasn't your choice. Colors here are rarely chosen. They are assigned by the mistress of the wardrobe, whose eye for harmony extends beyond fabric into the social balance of the harem itself. Sometimes you wonder if she dresses people as much for politics as for beauty. You sit and begin the process of drying your hair, working the towel slowly through the length. The strands cling together in damp ropes, catching on the cloth. Across the room, two concubines lean toward each other in front of a mirror, one drawing a thin line of kohl along her lower lid, the other holding up a necklace to judge the way it catches the light. Their conversation is quiet, but it drips with a practiced nonchalance, something about how she looked in green yesterday and how it didn't suit her at all. You can't help but notice how often she is used here instead of a name. In the harem, anonymity can be both shield and dagger. One of the attendants approaches with a small wooden tray. On it sits a narrow-necked bottle of attar, this one heavy with the scent of jasmine. You dab a little at your wrists and behind your ears, knowing that scent lingers in memory long after a face fades. There's an art to this. Too much perfume is an announcement. Too little is an absence. Just enough, and you leave a question in the air without ever speaking. You slip into the Antari, the silk, whispering as it slides over your skin. The pomegranate red catches the light from the brazier and deepens into something richer, almost like wine. The outer layer follows lighter, cooler, settling on your shoulders like a practiced touch. You fasten the small gold clasps at your waist, each one catching slightly before sliding into place. It is a slow transformation, but a deliberate one. Out there, beyond the women and attendants, the harem is a theater. Dressing is rehearsal and curtain rise in one. At the far end of the chamber, the mistress of the wardrobe moves from stool to stool inspecting her charges. She pauses to adjust a hem here, smooth a wrinkle there, or more, telling exchange a garment entirely. You've seen her strip an outer robe from one woman's shoulders without a word, hand it to another, and replace it with something plainer. The message is never explained, but always understood. She reaches your row and lets her gaze sweep over you in a glance that feels like both approval and appraisal. A small nod, and she moves on. A silver mirror leans against the wall beside you. You meet your own eyes, in it noting the set of your mouth, the calmness you've trained into your posture. This is the part that never gets mentioned. In the courtly poems, the calculation in the tilt of the chin, the way a lowered gaze can suggest humility or disinterest, depending on the timing. Beauty here isn't just in the curve of a cheek or the sheen of hair. It's in knowing exactly how much of yourself to display and when. A ripple of laughter rises from the opposite corner. One of the younger concubines has knocked over a tray of hairpins, and they scatter across the polished floor like tiny bits of fallen sunlight. Two attendants rush to gather them, their faces fixed in polite smiles. No one remarks on it, but you can feel the mild amusement simmering in the room. Every mishap here is a small story in the making, and stories have a way of being traded like currency. You pick up your sash, a length of silk in a muted gold, and tie it around your waist with a slow, deliberate knot. The ends fall, just so brushing the tops of your slippers. The knot matters. It can be tied to look casual or precise, and both carry messages. Today, you choose precise. You glance once more at the mirror, then rise from the stool, smoothing your robe as you step toward the corridor. The day outside is waiting, and you will meet it dressed not just in silk, but in the armor of intention. Here's the thing no one warns you about. The lessons are harder than the clothes. You can drape yourself in silk and fasten gold clasps until your fingers ache, but if you can't make a man laugh at the right moment or tilt your head just so when the valide asks a question, you may as well be wearing sackcloth. That's why, once you've stepped out of the dressing chamber, the morning belongs to instruction, and not the kind you can fake your way through. The training hall is bright and echoing with tall windows, latticed in carved cedar, letting in squares of warm light that fall like rugs across the polished floor. Cushions line the edges, and in the middle, the day's tutors wait like a panel of judges. There's the music master, a wiry man with fingers stained by the strings of his oud. The poetry tutor, whose beard is as meticulously trimmed as his metaphors. And the ever-watchful lady in charge of court etiquette, a woman whose smile could cut glass. You take your seat on a cushioned legs tucked neatly to one side and try to still the tiny hum of nerves in your chest. The music master begins plucking a slow, deliberate melody that you are expected to echo back. Your own fingers fumble for a moment. On the strings, too much pressure here, too little there, and you bite back a sigh. The trick you've learned is to make the error look intentional, as if you were offering a playful variation rather than missing the note entirely. Next comes poetry. Today's exercise is to recite a ghazal without dropping your gaze from the tutor's eyes, a small test of focus and poise. The verses are about the nightingale and the rose, that eternal metaphor of longing. But you can't help hearing the unspoken parallel. The rose is always the sultan, and the nightingale is whoever is clever enough to make him notice her song. Your voice is steady, the rhythm practiced. When you finish the poetry, tutor gives the smallest nod. Here that's practically a standing ovation. The etiquette lesson follows, and it is the most dangerous of the three. You are made to stand, walk, and sit as though the valide herself is watching. Every movement must be smooth, deliberate, and most importantly, unhurried. In the palace, rushing is, for servants and messengers, power walks slowly. The tutor makes you repeat the act of serving an imaginary guest, tea 3 times, correcting the angle of your wrist, the depth of your bow, the way you set the cup down, so that the handle faces precisely toward the guest's right hand. It's maddening, and yet you know that one day this ritual could be the moment that decides whether you are remembered or forgotten. During a brief pause, one of the other women leans toward you and murmurs something about the Valide Sultan's visit yesterday to the kitchens inspecting the sweetmeats. It's a nothing comment on the surface, but you file it away. If the Valide was in the kitchens, perhaps she intends to host guests soon, which means the harem might be called to perform. Performances mean exposure, and exposure means opportunity. The poetry tutor calls you back, for a second round this time, asking you to improvise a couplet in reply to his own. It's a delicate dance, matching his tone without overshadowing him. You choose something light, a metaphor about the moon, envying the glow of a candle, which earns you a faint chuckle. That's all you need. In a place where faces can remain as unreadable as coins, a chuckle is gold. By the time the lesson ends, your head feels full, half of melody, half of strategies. The music master dismisses you with a wave, the poetry tutor with a faint smile, and the etiquette mistress with a cool, unreadable glance. You gather your skirts and step back into the corridor, already sifting through what you've learned. Every bow, every note, every phrase is another layer of the armor you'll wear long before you ever enter the Sultan's presence. The corridor leading from the training hall is cooler, quieter, and lined with tall brass lamps that catch and scatter the light in soft circles. You walk in measured steps, letting your pulse settle after the last round of lessons, when a sudden hush ahead makes you slow even more. From the corner, a figure appears, not just any figure, but the Valid Sultan herself, gliding toward you with the kind of serene authority that makes the air shift. She is not tall, but she seems to fill the space, her layered robes heavy with embroidery that ripples like water as she moves. Pearls cluster at her throat, and a thin, precise line of kohl frames eyes that miss nothing. You've seen portraits of her in the palace halls, painted in a way that flatters but cannot capture the subtle pressure of her gaze. Here in person, she radiates the calm of someone who knows the rules because she wrote them. Protocol demands you stop, bow slightly, and keep your eyes lowered until she passes. But there is an art to even that. Too low, and you look servile. Too quick, and you seem dismissive. You choose a slow, graceful bow, eyes lowered just enough to hint at respect without erasing yourself entirely. When she comes close enough for you to smell the faint musk of her perfume, she pauses. Her eyes lift toward you, a slow appraisal that feels heavier than the robe on your shoulders. Pomegranate, she says, her voice low but clear, referring to the color of your antari. A strong choice. It's not exactly praise, but it's not a rebuke either. You murmur your thanks, careful to keep your tone warm but light. This is not a conversation, it's an evaluation, and you have passed well enough to be remembered, at least for now. She moves on, her attendants flowing around her like water around a stone. You catch the faintest exchange between two of them, a quick sideways glance, and a whisper that's lost to the echoing hall. Whatever it was, it's not for you, at least, not yet. You continue walking, but her presence lingers behind you like a scent in the air. Encounters with the Valid Sultan are rare, and each one is a kind of currency. Some women spend it quickly bragging in the baths that they were noticed. Others hoard it, letting the memory of her attention sharpen their confidence for weeks. You decide to store this moment away polished and ready for when it might be useful. Turning another corner, you pass an open balcony where the sun has finally broken through the morning haze. It spills across the marble in sharp rectangles, lighting motes of dust that dance in the air. For a heartbeat, the harem feels almost peaceful, just silk sunlight and the faint sound of distant fountains. But beneath it runs the quiet truth you've learned since arriving. Peace here is never the whole story. At the end of the hall, you hear the soft shuffle of slippers against marble and glance over your shoulder. Two concubines are approaching, their heads bent close together, voices low. The moment they notice you looking, their conversation still's replaced by identical polite smiles. You return the smile, knowing it means exactly nothing. In the harem, politeness is simply the thinnest veil over whatever people are really thinking. A servant appears from a side passage, carrying a silver tray with a note folded neatly on it. He passes without stopping, but you catch a glimpse of the seal, one you've seen on the Valide's correspondence before. It disappears down another hallway, toward some other chamber where another woman waits. Perhaps knowing, and perhaps dreading, what the message might mean. The scent of warm bread drifts in from the kitchens below, and your stomach twists in quiet reminder that the day's schedule doesn't often pause for hunger. You'll eat when it's time, and not before. For now, the memory of the Valid's eyes on you keeps your steps measured, your shoulders set. In this palace, being seen is half the battle. Being remembered is the other half. The afternoon settles over the harem like a drowsy cat, warm, languid, and deceptively harmless. Sunlight slides through the latticed screens, breaking into patterned shadows across the cushions and low tables. Somewhere outside, the fountains murmur their steady rhythm, lulling the corridors into a kind of suspended calm. You sink into a broad divan, upholstered in soft brocade, its surface just cool enough to make you adjust your position until the fabric warms beneath you. A silver tray rests on the table at your side, holding a small porcelain cup of thick, sweet coffee, the kind that leaves a grainy layer at the bottom if you're not careful. The steam curls upward, carrying a scent so rich it makes your eyelids heavy. Across the room, two women lounge with their embroidery, the threads in their hands glinting as they pass through cloth. From their posture alone, half turned away from each other, you can tell they're not speaking. Silence can be louder than conversation here. It's tempting to think of this hour as harmless, but you've learned it's a prime time for quiet maneuvers. This is when a friendly concubine might lean in to share a rumor so sharp it cuts 3 people before the coffee cools. Or when a careless remark could reach the wrong ears because you forgot the cushions muffle voices less than you think. A few seats away, a girl named Zainab leans toward her neighbor, murmuring something that makes them both glance quickly at the doorway. You don't need to hear the words to recognize the pattern, the darted look, the shared half-smile. They're testing information, passing it like a coin to see if it's genuine. You sip your coffee and keep your gaze steady on the latticework, as though the patterns are more interesting than people. From outside, the distant call of a street vendor drifts up, softened by distance and stone walls. It's a reminder that the city beyond the harem still moves, that other lives are unfolding in the markets, the docks, the winding alleys. The contrast is sharp out there, freedom and dust, and here velvet and rules. An attendant passes with a small basket of pomegranates, their skins glossy and taut. She stops to offer them to the women working embroidery, who accept with slow, deliberate motions the way people do when they're buying themselves time to think. In the harem, accepting fruit is never just about eating it. It can be an invitation, a thank you, or even a quiet agreement. You take one when the basket reaches you, its weight solid and cold in your palm. A shadow falls across your lap. It's Layla, one of the older concubines you saw in the baths this morning, pausing beside your divan. Enjoying the peace, she asks, her voice light, but her eyes carrying a different weight. You offer a polite nod, neither inviting her to sit nor moving to end the conversation. She lingers just long enough to suggest she was hoping for a longer exchange, then drifts away. Her robe, catching the light like ripples in a dark pond. You crack the pomegranate open, its red seeds catching the sunlight. The juice stains your fingertips, and for a moment, you imagine the merchants in the bazaar, weighing fruit the same way their hands rough and sure. The harem's version is cleaner, quieter, but the transaction is the same. Something is given, something is taken. The fountain's murmur shifts, mingling with the faint scrape of a chair leg against marble from somewhere deeper in the room. An attendant moves to pour more coffee, the rich scent cutting through the warm, still air. You set your empty cup back on the tray, careful not to let it clink. Noise carries in strange ways here, and the last thing you want is to become the subject of the next whispered observation. You lean back, letting your gaze follow the drift of a dust mote caught in a sunbeam. The stillness of the room is deceptive. Beneath it, threads are being pulled, knots tied, and plans woven so tightly they won't be seen until they're already in place. You take another seed from the pomegranate, letting its burst of sharp sweetness fill your mouth, and wait for the next move, yours or someone else's, to break the calm. You don't hear him before you feel it, the shift in the air, like the moment before a summer storm. One of the younger attendants scurries past, eyes wide, her tray of tea trembling ever so slightly. That's when you know. The Sultan is moving through the harem corridors. You've never been close enough to speak to him, but proximity alone has its own gravity here. It pulls, glances, straightens, spines, changes the timbre of every conversation mid-sentence. You rise from the divan without really thinking, smoothing the folds of your robe so they fall just right. Around you, the others adjust in their own ways. One sets down her embroidery. Another subtly repositions herself in a pool of light spilling from the lattice. The Valid's son is not a man you bump into by chance. Every encounter is curated, even the ones that seem accidental. The sound of footsteps grows clearer, not hurried, but deliberate. He appears at the far end of the corridor, flanked by two of his closest advisors, their dark caftans edged in gold braid. He is younger than the portraits, or perhaps simply more alive. Shoulders, straight gaze, calm, the faint glint of a jeweled dagger at his belt. His robe is a deep sapphire silk, the kind that drinks in the light rather than reflects it. He doesn't look at everyone. In fact, that's the power of it. His eyes move over the space with the ease of someone who knows he doesn't have to seek attention. Attention seeks him. When his gaze passes over you, it lingers just a fraction longer than necessary. You remind yourself to keep your expression serene, the way you practiced in the etiquette hall. But you can feel the pulse in your throat all the same. The corridor seems to shrink as he approaches, not because of the space, but because every sense sharpens. You catch the faintest scent, something warm, resinous, maybe amber. His advisors speak in low voices, but you can't make out the words. This isn't a moment for listening to details. It's about watching everything else. The way his hand adjusts the folds of his robe. The faint tightening at the corner of his mouth when one advisor says something that doesn't please him. Then, without breaking stride, he pauses near the lattice window, where the light falls in clean patterns across the marble. His eyes turn toward the gardens below, but you know he's aware of every figure in this corridor. One of the concubines nearby shifts slightly closer, almost imperceptibly, and murmurs something about the flowers being especially fine this season. He doesn't answer, but a hint of a smile touches his mouth before he moves on. For her, that half-smile will be replayed in her head for weeks. As he passes, you lower your gaze, not in submission, but in measured deference. You don't want to seem too eager nor too aloof. The trick is to be exactly enough. In the split second, when he's close enough for the fabric of his robe to brush the air between you, you wonder, not for the first time, how many lives here have turned on moments exactly like this. He disappears into the next corridor, his advisors following, and the atmosphere shifts again, as though the palace exhales. Conversations resume, but softer, now tinged with speculation. Did he notice anyone? Did he speak? Did his expression mean anything at all? You return to your seat, the cushions still holding the faint warmth from before you rose. The coffee on the tray beside you has cooled, but you don't reach for it. Your mind is busy cataloging every detail of those few seconds, as if arranging them in a box you can open later. In the harem, memory is as much a tool as a smile, and you've just been handed something worth keeping. By the time the sun begins its slow drop toward the horizon, the harem has started to hum again, not with the sleepy undercurrent of afternoon, but with the measured anticipation of evening. Lanterns are lit along the walls, each one a small bloom of gold that throws shifting shadows across the marble floors. Somewhere deeper in the palace, the musicians are tuning their instruments, the strings sending out bright plucked notes, like birds testing their wings. You make your way to the main salon, where tonight's entertainment will unfold. The space is a sweep of patterned carpets and low tables with cushions stacked high enough to sink into. Attendants bustle quietly in the background, setting trays of candied fruits, spiced nuts, and sherbets in crystal cups. The air is threaded with the scent of orange blossom water, sharp and sweet enough to make you want to breathe more deeply. The women arrive in stages, each group choosing its place with the subtlety of a chess player. Those with confidence or influence settle nearer the open space where the performers will appear. Others choose the shadowed corners close enough to be seen, but far enough to watch without being watched too closely. You take a place somewhere between near enough to catch the energy of the evening, far enough to observe. The first performer is a young woman with a tambourine, its rim inlaid with tiny bells that chime as she moves. Her dance is light, almost playful, the sound of the bells matching the quick flicker of her steps. The rhythm draws quiet claps from some of the women, but you notice how the older ones watch more than they applaud. Performance here is rarely just about skill. It's about the message sent, the alliances hinted, at the impression left lingering when the music stops. Next, a storyteller takes the floor. A tall man in a dark robe, his beard neatly combed. He carries no book, only a carved staff that he plants in the carpet before beginning. His voice is low and measured, telling a tale of a merchant who loses his fortune only to regain it through the kindness of a stranger. The story is gentle enough, but in the harem, even kindness is a kind of currency. You wonder if the choice of tale is his, or if someone suggested it with a particular listener in mind. When the music begins again, it's from a small ensemble seated cross-legged on a carpet to one side. The oud and ney weave their notes together, the rhythm slow at first, then quickening like a heartbeat before slowing again. A singer joins them, her voice high and clear, gliding over the melody with the ease of someone who knows exactly how to hold a room's attention. You find yourself glancing around between verses, noting who leans forward, who exchanges quiet remarks, who watches without blinking. The Valid Sultan is not present tonight, but her absence doesn't lessen the weight of observation. Everyone here knows that what happens in the salon will be spoken of in the baths tomorrow, and from there anywhere. An attendant appears at your side with a tray offering sugared almonds. You take two, feeling the grainy coating crack beneath your teeth, the sweetness spreading across your tongue. A few seats away, a woman in emerald silk tilts her head back in laughter at something whispered into her ear. The sound carries across the room, drawing glances that are half curiosity, half calculation. As the evening winds on, the performers rotate, dancers, musicians, another storyteller. You let the rhythm of it wash over you, aware that the night is as much about the unspoken exchanges as it is about the art. Somewhere in the middle of a particularly intricate AUD solo, you catch a moment, two women on opposite sides of the room, meeting each other's gaze for a heartbeat too long before looking away. In the harem, that's enough to start a dozen rumors. The final dance is slower, almost meditative, the dancer's hands tracing patterns in the air that seem to catch the light from the lanterns. When she finishes, the applause is polite measured. This is not the place for wild enthusiasm. You rise with the others as the attendants begin to clear the trays, the air now scented faintly with extinguished wicks and lingering perfume. The salon is still warm from the press of bodies when you slip into the cooler corridor beyond. The quiet feels strange after the rise and fall of music, but it doesn't last. A figure approaches an attendant you've seen before, always at the edge of the Valid Sultan's gatherings. In his hand is a folded slip of paper sealed in red wax. He stops just short of you and bows slightly. "For you," he says, and the words feel heavier than they should. The paper is small enough to hide entirely in your palm. You don't open it there. The corridor is never as empty as it looks. Instead, you keep walking at an unhurried pace until you reach a small alcove near the inner garden, where the shadows are thick and the only sound is the trickle of a water channel feeding the fountain outside. Only then do you break the seal. The message is brief, no more than a line, but it's enough to set your pulse against your ribs. You are requested this evening. There's no signature, no mark of whose request it is, but the omission is almost as telling as the words themselves. You fold the paper twice until it's small enough to disappear into the sleeve of your robe. You don't rush back toward your chambers. Rushing draws attention, and attention now could be a liability. Instead, you take the longer route through the colonnade that overlooks the gardens. The evening air is cooler here, scented with night-blooming jasmine. The moonlight turns the marble pale and the shadows deep. In the stillness, you can almost believe the palace sleeps, though you know it never truly does. When you reach your chamber, one of the attendants is already waiting a fresh robe draped over her arms. This one is lighter than the pomegranate red from earlier soft cream silk, the sleeves wide and edged in pale gold thread. She doesn't speak much as she helps you change, but her movements are precise, almost ceremonial. There's no mistaking the care in the way she smooths the fabric over your shoulders. Your hair is recoiled, a few strands left loose in the style favored for less formal but still significant meetings, a touch of rose oil at your wrists, a small pearl pin for your hair. These are details that seem minor until you remember how much weight a first glance can carry here. The harem runs on such details, each one a stone in the path you're meant to walk. The corridors between your chamber and the inner rooms are dim lit only by a few wall lamps. Your steps echo more than you expect, though you try to keep them soft. You pass other women along the way, some returning from the baths, others heading toward the salon. Their eyes flick toward you, curious but unreadable. You don't offer explanation. No one would in your place. A final turn takes you to a guarded doorway. The eunuch stationed there doesn't ask for your name. He simply opens the door with a small incline of his head. Inside, the air is warmer again, scented faintly with sandalwood. The room is quieter than you'd imagined. No bustle of attendants, no idle conversation, just a single pool of lamplight falling across a low table where a small arrangement of figs and pomegranates sits untouched. You're left there for a moment long enough for the quiet to press in on you. It's a waiting designed to remind you where you are and what you're here for. Not to rush, not to assume, simply to be present. Somewhere beyond that lamplight, the next move will be made, and you'll have to match it without faltering. You stand just inside the pool of lamplight, hands folded loosely before you, the cream silk of your robe catching and releasing the glow as you shift your weight. The air is thick with the warm scent of sandalwood and something subtler, amber, perhaps rising from a small bronze burner on the low table. Beyond the circle of light, the room remains in soft shadow, the carved wooden panels glinting faintly where the gold inlay catches a stray flicker from the flame. A soft sound, slippers brushing over a carpet, breaks the stillness. A figure emerges from the darker edge of the room, moving without hurry. You don't need to be told who it is. Even without the robes, heavy with embroidery, without the quiet authority in his step, you would know. The Sultan carries the same gravity here in private as he does in the corridors, though it feels different without the audience. He stops a few paces from you, his gaze steady. You came, he says simply, as though there was any other choice. You offer the faintest incline of your head in answer, careful to let neither eagerness nor hesitation color your expression. In this space, the smallest shift can tilt the balance of a conversation. He gestures toward the low table, and you follow him there, settling on the cushion opposite. The fruit remains untouched between you, more ornament than offering. He speaks in a tone meant for two people alone, low, almost conversational, asking about the music from the salon earlier, whether the oud player was as skilled as last year's. You answer as you must, honestly, but with the careful phrasing that leaves room for him to hear what he wants. The minutes slip by in an odd blend of formality and ease. His words are measured, but there's a faint humor in them, a wryness you hadn't expected. Once, when you remarked lightly that the storyteller's tale of the generous merchant seemed a little pointed, a small smile tugs at his mouth. It vanishes quickly, but you notice. At some point, the door opens just enough for an attendant to place a small silver tray on the floor, bearing 2 cups of coffee, so dark they seem to swallow the lamplight. The cups are delicate, painted with curling vines of gold leaf. You take yours with both hands, the porcelain warm against your palms, and sip slowly. The bitter richness spreads across your tongue, grounding you in the moment, even as you're aware of every heartbeat. When the conversation winds down, it's without ceremony. The Sultan rises, offering only a brief nod before stepping back into the dimmer part of the room. You remain seated until the soft sound of the door opening and closing reaches you. Then the silence expands again, wrapping around the space where he stood. You set the coffee cup back onto the tray, its rim still warm, and feel the weight of the evening settle into you. Not as a burden, but as a mark, something you will carry back into the harem, something that will shape how eyes follow you in the baths, in the corridors, in the dressing chambers. You know this night will be spoken of without being spoken about the way everything here is. When you step back into the corridor, the air feels cooler, lighter. The lamps flicker along the walls, and the marble beneath your feet seems to hold the faint echo of your steps. You return to the dormitory quietly, the others already curled in their beds, their breathing slow and even. You slip beneath your own blanket, the cream silk robe folded neatly beside you, and close your eyes. The night holds its breath around you, but your mind drifts over the day, the rustle of dawn In the sleeping chamber, the swirl of steam in the hammam, the weight of the validus sultan's gaze, the quiet pull of music and stories, the fleeting moment when the sultan's eyes lingered just a beat too long. Each fragment a thread, each thread part of the tapestry you're weaving here, whether you mean to or not. Sleep comes slowly, but when it does, it is deep, the kind that wraps you in shadows without threat. In dreams, the corridors are endless, the light always warm, and the marble floors remember your steps. And now, as the last echoes of the palace fade, you let the walls of the harem dissolve into quiet. The rustle of silk, the soft drip of water in the baths, the low hum of music in the salon, all drift away, like lanterns floating out to sea. The day's glances, whispers, and measured steps become nothing more than gentle ripples on a still surface. You breathe in the fading scent of rosewater and sandalwood, feeling it settle around you like a warm blanket. Here there are no rivalries, no expectations, only the safe hush of night. Let your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts soften, and your dreams carry you somewhere beyond the latticework, where only peace waits.